Hello everyone, and welcome to another Bottled Sky devlog. It's been a very busy month and I had to start this video much later than I would have liked, but it does mean that I have plenty to talk about. Before I start talking about new features, I want to say that we did something exciting, which was that we showed off Bottled Sky at an event in Sweden called the Creative Coast Festival. The event was held on the 21st of April, and much of April was spent preparing Bottled Sky to be ready for this event. This is the first time we've had playtesters from the general public, and so we got plenty of feedback which we'll talk about later in the video. Let's get stuck into it. So I started off by making a plan for what I wanted to have in the demo to show to players. I broke the plan up into 3 parts. What do I want players to actually do from start to finish in a short play session? What features do I need to create in order to make this happen? And then non-gameplay stuff like a logo, a Steam page to direct potential future players to wishlist, and various social media accounts that will be dedicated to Bottled Sky. I knew the Steam page might have been a bit of a stretch because we don't have nearly enough content to make the Steam page look interesting enough, let alone enough for a trailer, but it's unfortunate that I didn't find time to make these social media accounts. When we finally went to Creative Coast Festival, I had nowhere to direct them other than my general Discord server or this YouTube channel to which a few new people have subscribed to. Hello, you lovely new people. Thank you very much for taking the time to test our demo, provide useful feedback, and showing enough interest to subscribe to this channel. Much appreciated. You're about to find out how many of the features you saw were crammed into 3 weeks of development. Moving back to the gameplay checklist, you can see that it is completely checked off, but actually somewhere during those 3 weeks, I realized I wasn't going to have enough time to add a new ability and the equipment system, so I cut it out, which I think was a good idea for the brevity of the demo. In the feature requirements checklist, you might see that I missed a couple of features related to resetting the demo back to either the beginning or before the fight with the hamster. I tried simply reloading the scene, but I ran into so many errors trying to do that I decided it was easier just to close the game and rerun it. Unfortunately, this meant that I or someone else had to always be available at the booth to reset the demo after anyone was done playing. I won't go through every point in these checklists, so you can just pause and read if you're curious. In hindsight, I think this was a good way of planning the demo. It gave me a clear idea of how each play session was going to run, so I was able to see where players have deviated from the plan due to the open nature of the game world. It also gave me a clear idea of what features I needed to create for this demo. Rather than sticking to my overall plan, I was able to decide what could be skipped and returned to later, and what I needed to prioritize sooner. I'd say the thing that took up most of development time was finally finishing off the hamster enemy. I'll talk more about that later, but for now I'm going to briefly summarize all of the new features that have been added and my thoughts on their design. So in a past devlog, I mentioned both having a repair kit item and being able to open a contextual drop-down menu within the inventory UI. For a while, the only accessible options were to open the description or to close the contextual drop-down itself, but for consumable items, I've added a use option that will trigger its effect and expend one of the selected item. I'm not currently happy with this being the only option available for using consumable items. It's not too bad for a repair kit like this, but if I want more combat-oriented consumable items, then it's just too many clicks to do in a potentially stressful situation, especially since the inventory menu blocks a significant portion of the screen. I would like a solution that involves much fewer inputs, without adding a bunch of new buttons to the whole controls layout. I think I've said this before, but for accessibility and ease of use, I'd like to keep the number of required buttons to a minimum, at least less than what modern gamepads use. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts in the comments if you have ideas for how you should use consumable items in a game like this. Nevertheless, this solution worked enough for the demo, so let's move on. The next step was to hide the boost ability until after you've used the repair kit. For context, I want the shuttle to initially appear damaged. This fits the game's narrative premise, and also allows me to teach the game's controls by gradually unlocking them piece by piece, and not overwhelming the player. I also made it so that the shuttle is initially missing some health to further emphasize that the shuttle is damaged. Using the repair kit would then heal the missing health and repair the boost ability. Speaking of health, we added some more stylized UI that shows you your current health and the amount of boost you have left. I asked the artist to do a mock-up of how the UI should look and what the animation should look like when you take damage. It took me a while to figure out how to write a shader to closely match this mock-up animation, but I think I managed to get a satisfying result. Lastly, I wanted to tutorialize the game so that I don't need to actually tell every person that sits at our booth what the controls are. I chose to do this in a few different ways. In the bottom left, you can see a bunch of actions and icons that tell you which input to use to get the action you want. It might seem a bit crude, and it takes up quite a lot of space, but it gets the job done. And even some AAA games have these dynamic control lists that tell you what controls you have available currently. Another tactic I employed was short contextual pop-ups. At the beginning of the demo, the first action I want the player to do is start moving, so it makes sense to tell them how to do that. I did add my own little twist to this though. When playing other games, I personally like to have a bit of time to figure things out myself, so I made it so that the contextual pop-ups only appear after 5 seconds. If you did the action before that 5-second timer elapses, then you don't get the pop-up at all because you don't need it. This is where the control list in the bottom left also shines, because occasionally players figured out the action by accident by mashing buttons and didn't learn the input. Or later, they realized they forgot how to do something. Finally, I did things like highlighting and putting moving arrows near UI buttons if I wanted the player to click on something specific. One mistake I made was making those arrows too small. Most players did see the arrow, but some didn't and got stuck for longer than expected. Some things were a bit rushed, and some pop-ups broke and stayed on screen permanently during a play session. But overall, I'd say these tutorializing efforts were effective, and no one complained about there being too many tutorial distractions. One thing I underestimated was the playtester's ability to understand what to do even when the tutorial broke. It's possible that the playtester's understanding of games and game design was biased in my favor, but not every playtester was a game developer. Some were even kids. I don't think I would reduce the amount of tutorializing I do though, just because there were no complaints about the working tutorials and none of it halts gameplay. Moving on. Something else I wanted to have in the demo was some dialogue that helps players understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and setting the tone of a potential story. This was definitely rushed and could do with some more work. It would have been nice to have someone else to read through before going to the festival, but it was something I wrote quickly and added a day or two before the event, and didn't have much time for pre-testing. More specifically, I made the dialogue segments too long. Many players skipped the dialogue, which was expected, but some of the players that did read the dialogue said it was too much. While I wasn't planning on presenting the beginning of Bottled Sky like this for the final release, this was still valuable feedback that I should be aware of if I write more dialogue in future. That pretty much covers the broad strokes of features that I added for the Creative Coast Festival Showcase. I think now it's a good idea to present some of the feedback and things I learnt from watching players interact with the game, aside from some of the things I've already mentioned. Probably the biggest point of contention was the gameplay design of the hamster. I'm glad to say that a vast majority of players figured out how to do combat as soon as or very quickly after being presented with it. This is good because that is something I chose to not make explicitly clear to players. I wanted to teach players how to use the drill on asteroids, and then present them with the hamster enemy, and hope that they could use what they just learnt without me saying, you can also use your drill for combat. What threw many players off, however, was how the hamster would do a melee attack to knock you away after you've been drilling for enough time. Players said that they were feeling punished for doing something that they were taught to do. The players were right. They were being punished, but I hadn't thought of this behaviour like that. So it highlighted a disconnect between my understanding and a player's understanding of the game. This is why playtesting with others is an important part of development. It's easy for a developer to be too comfortable with their game, and it becomes difficult to see the game the same way a brand new player might see it, because you've spent hundreds, maybe thousands of hours playing your game. At the time, I hand-waved away some of the criticism by saying that this would normally not be the first enemy you'd fight, and in the final release, you'll have more tools to deal with this. But after the event, when I had time to reflect on feedback, I realized that I had solved a particular problem with the drilling mechanic in a way that was misunderstanding the player experience. Let me explain. A core feature of the drilling mechanic is that once you have attached to a target, both you and the target are stuck together and the drill does a constant stream of damage to the target. I could code it differently, but this provides the experience that I want this game to have. In my head, I think of this like an extended hit-stop animation where the tip of your drill is always the focal point of your damage. Somewhere during the design of the hamster, I realized that if an enemy has high enough health, then you would end up drilling for an awkward amount of time, and it would just eventually die without ever presenting a challenge after you start drilling. To solve both of those issues, I added a behavior to the hamster to be able to defend itself during this state. To avoid that awkwardly long drill animation, I let the hamster cut it short by doing a melee attack. In my head, I wasn't thinking of this as a punishment, I was thinking of it as a necessity to make the fight more interesting. After finding that disconnect between myself and the players, it has now prompted me to ask the question, how can I design lengthier encounters longer than a few seconds that are fun for the player without changing the drilling mechanic? I've brainstormed a few ideas with the team, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. In the week following the Creative Coast Festival, progress on the game itself slowed down, but I was still extremely busy. I spent a week creating a small prototype to rapidly test a bunch of new features and designs that could go into Bottled Sky based on the amount of feedback I'd been receiving. It's not pretty because I was working on this alone, but bear with me. One feature I tested was sideways dodging. This is something I'd been avoiding putting into Bottled Sky for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think the controls for this might be a bit confusing given our perspective, because if sideways is relevant to the rotation of the shuttle, then that means facing downwards causes a left dodge to actually go right and vice versa. Secondly, I think this could be a gateway to more defensive gameplay, which is something I'm strictly trying to avoid. On its own, it doesn't encourage defensive gameplay because you'd still need to get up close to use your drill, but combined with projectiles, that becomes a different story. Initial testing of the prototype received positive feedback, so this is something that I will recreate for Bottled Sky, but I'll be doing more testing and see how players use this feature. Another feature I was testing was projectiles. Common feedback from playtesters of Bottled Sky suggested that shooting projectiles would be a natural fit for a game like this, and I don't think I can ignore that. Again, I'd been avoiding this because it could lead to more defensive gameplay, but I did receive some great ideas from players for how I could use projectiles to promote aggressive gameplay and highlight the drill as the main mechanic. I will be adding projectiles to Bottled Sky, and I'll likely keep it depending on the gameplay design of the projectiles. A third feature I was testing was simple, low health enemies. You'd think I would have done this earlier for Bottled Sky, but somehow that didn't happen. I created a simple set of behaviors for an enemy with low health, and I would say I like the result, so look forward to more combat involving groups of enemies. I thought group combat would be a bad idea because of how the drill only targets one enemy, but if each enemy is low health and you design the behaviors to not group up so easily, then it actually ends up being quite fun to take them out one by one. Look forward to that. A fourth and quite large feature was a dungeon crawling game mode. There were some concerns from the team about the scope of the game and being unsure of how long the project might take. I took this opportunity to create a smaller, contained version of the game where you explore a series of rooms, enemies spawn in those rooms, you fight them, and move on to the next room until eventually you fight a boss and get a reward. This was actually a planned feature on the Trello board called Terrax Stations, hence the name of the prototype, Project Terrax. I pitched the idea of pivoting the whole project to this smaller version of the game where we could create that in a few months, sell it, and use the profits to fund continuation on the larger Bottled Sky project. After much discussion, in the end, we decided to not do that and instead continue with Bottled Sky. But the Terrax prototype still has some valuable takeaways about what features we could include that I was previously hesitant about. Amidst the chaos of April, I was encountered with yet another challenge. I brought on a new member to the team to help with making sound effects. This means I now have 2 other team members, and the challenge I was beginning to face was realizing that I had been focusing almost exclusively on programming, and neglecting my duties of managing the team, which has now technically doubled in size if I don't include myself as the project lead. Max, the artist and animator, has been doing a great job keeping up with all of the work I've given them. However, I was responsible for every other role in the project, namely project management, design, programming, sound effects, music, writing, and marketing. I could see that I was a big bottleneck for the project, and any help that I could get would naturally speed up the project. Sound effects are something that I can do well enough on my own, but it was something I kept putting off because I don't actually enjoy it much, so I'm happy to have someone who does. Speaking of those roles, I might consider adding more members to the team. Consider joining my Discord server, link in the description, and hit me up if you're interested. It's been a busy month, and this video is late because I had to prioritize some of those project management duties over these videos. There is more I could talk about the stuff that has happened in the last few days, but this video is getting long enough. You'll have to wait for the next video to hear about things like, what are the design pillars of Bottled Sky? For now, consider subscribing so that you can be notified when I upload future videos. Like the video if you thought it was interesting. Thanks for watching, that's all for now, and I'll see you later.